Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Welcome to this episode of The Murder Part. Tonight we'll be looking at the case of Douglas Parkhurst. We'll get started with introductions. Jeff?
My name is Jeff Pincin. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. And if you leave a comment or question below, we'll respond in a YouTube short we're planning to release pretty soon. And if I hadn't become a counselor, I wanted to measure guardrails to see if they lined up with the dent in the car. Turns out investigators already do this, officers already do this, so they don't need a separate person. So I had to go with the shattered dream direction and chose counseling.
A tough break.
It was. It really was.
Tough break.
Yeah, I didn't measure up. See what I did there?
I see what you did there.
Very good, very good. Mike?
My name is Mike, also a licensed professional counselor in the state of Delaware. If I hadn't become a counselor, at one time in my life, I've never really been interested in sports, but I wanted to be on the peripheral of sports. So it's kind of like a safety monitor kind of thing I wanted to do, like going out to like baseball fields and football fields and soccer fields and everything, and like measuring up for like safety equipment around to keep people from coming on the field or things like that. It's really most profitable in municipal places because there's a lot more of them, especially with kids around. But turns out like city planners do that already. Oh. So and I didn't want to go become a city planner because who wants to spend 2 years championing a stop sign? Not me. So
Yeah.
shattered dream took me down the road to counseling.
Not
Sorry,
a home run.
Mike.
Not a home run.
Yeah. I had to stop.
Plan for something else.
Yeah.
Another tough break. So this case is really quite peculiar. This is one of the more peculiar cases I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Not necessarily dramatic in that it doesn't have a lot of people getting killed, although a few,
Two,
couple,
at least.
Unfortunately.
people get killed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, too.
But it's not like a serial killer case or some type of mass shooting. But there's a very odd connection between two separate incidents that occurred, which just make this so unusual. It was covered in an article, I think it was in ESPN.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's also a documentary that went along with it, I guess.
Made by ESPN.
Right. And I think they covered the same things, if I'm not mistaken. But a local newspaper in, I think it was New York State, also had a long series of articles about the first incident involved in this kind of peculiar duo of tragedies.
Right.
So let's hear some background about what happened here with Douglas Parkhurst.
Yeah. We should note that I don't think I ever expected to say this information came from ESPN on here. It's just not the kind of source that you expect. Right?
Especially not from us.
Right.
I'll just say,
Never expect anything from sports.
yeah, I don't think any of us really are sports fans, particularly.
That might have been the first time I've ever gone on the ESPN website.
I think I can say the same.
Yeah. Which I, again, was not expecting in planning for this.
This is the first time I ever thought about getting an ESPN subscription to try and watch this documentary.
To try to get information.
I decided
for the
against
podcast.
it. There was nothing else that was driving me to ESPN or anything. I said, no, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So, and then the reason it's ESPN is because of the sports connection, I guess. So, nonetheless.
Yeah.
So, October 31st, 1968, Doug Parkhurst was driving under the influence of alcohol, and it's never been confirmed necessarily, but very highly likely that he hit 4-year-old Carolee Ashby. He didn't stop, but his brother was in the back, passed out, also under the influence, and kind of woke up because of the noise and because of the feeling that hitting the girl, and his brother had said he hit a guardrail. So through a series of events, nothing was ever done about that. The police did contact him. They had the right information, but just nothing ever became of that. So he went on living his life. So this is the short version of it. We'll go into more detail, of course. Fast forward all the way to June 1st, 2018. This is where the connection happens. 51-year-old Carol Sharrow was experiencing a bipolar episode, and she drove through the gates onto a baseball field where a Little League game was happening. 13 and 14-year-old boys were playing this baseball game.
They should have had some safety equipment to stop that car from going out of the field.
That could have been you,
Just
Mike.
saying.
Could have been you. She drove around the field, but thankfully did not injure anybody at that point. And so she drove toward the gate to exit. A man ran down from the stand, seemingly to close the gate. It looked like he was trying to close the gate. Why he was trying to do that, maybe to stop her, nobody's really sure. That man, Doug Parkhurst, that we, from 1968, Doug Parkhurst. And he was 68 years old at the time, and he was there to see his grandson's baseball game. So he went to close the gate, and despite everyone yelling to get out of the way, he did not move from in front of this car. And Carol Sharrow ran into him as she was going toward the gate to get out of there, and he died shortly after, as they were waiting for the medevac to come get him. And he was seen by many as a hero at the time because he was potentially going to help people, potentially pushing kids out of the way to make sure they don't get hurt, that kind of thing. And then the news started to come out about the incident from 1968, and we'll go into the details that he had kind of confessed to it years before. And then people started to change their story. Well, actually, maybe 4-year-old Carol Lee, maybe her death was actually avenged at that point. So years after the initial event, we see this connection and the kind of strange things. He hit someone hit him, ending his life. So just a strange connection that he would even be in that place at that time and have that happen to him. So very weird thing.
Yeah, just kind of a 1 in a billion.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine how many people die from getting hit from a car, like pedestrian being hit by a car. It happens, certainly.
Right.
It does.
But how many people really die that way?
Right.
And there's a chance you would live, right? You could be hit by something else, bus, motorcycle. But if you hit by, I think they were both sedans, right?
And to be fair, most of the individuals who would be hit by a car or a bus or something like that, pedestrians, but that would happen in the street.
Right.
Yeah.
Like crossing at the wrong spot or not paying attention or the driver's not paying attention in the street.
Somewhere where cars usually are on the street.
It's much, much, much harder to imagine the odds when you're just on a baseball field.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was in the driven portion, like he was in front of the gate.
Yeah, he was in the main gate. But generally, you don't think a car is going to come off of the baseball field.
Right. That direction would be unexpected.
That's the direction you'd be unexpected. Most of the time, you're not going to see. I mean, occasionally they take cars on for advertising purposes, but they usually do that slowly, safely, carefully. Nobody's around, low speed.
They're planning for it.
They're planning for it. In this particular case, nobody was planning. Carol Sharrow wasn't even planning to go onto that field at that point. And just his actions to put himself in, and as some witnesses said at the time, that he was pushing kids out of the way, indicates he was putting himself into harm's way to try and help others. And he gets hit and killed by a car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just very, very odd. You just wouldn't expect. You don't hear that many happening like that.
That's the kind of thing you get out of like a really cheesy anthology horror show. Like, somebody kills somebody, they cover it up, and then years later they die the exact same means.
There was a movie
like
that had a
Tales from the
bunch
Crypt or
young people.
Creep Show.
I know what you did last summer. Is that the?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of young people that had spoiler alert for. I don't remember all the details of it, but
yeah. Came out in the mid '90s or late '90s.
Yeah,
I know what you did. I know
they killed someone by accident or negligently, maybe recklessly.
Yeah, they ran over somebody and then disposed of the body.
Yeah,
but the killer turned out to be the person who got run over. Spoiler alert.
Go figure. And then they came out with a few more, I think.
Yeah, they were.
Still Know What You Did.
Yeah,
I think they came out with a new one recently. I thought maybe they did.
No, that was Scream.
Was that Scream?
Was Scream series.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it really does seem like something out of a movie. So when I saw this case, it just it was so peculiar to see that connection. And then digging into all the details, it only gets really creepier, and just much more odd as you dig into his life and then kind of the events around killing Carol Lee, and then to have somebody named Carol.
Right.
I mean, first of all, the action, the ultimate action of this starts on Halloween, like October 31st, and the little Carol Lee's sister was going out to get birthday candles or something. They were walking home and crossing the street.
Yeah, they were in Fulton, New York, on South First Street. That's where they lived. The family lived, Ashby family. And kind of looking at the map, and it might have changed since 1968 a bit, but kind of looking at the map online and everything, this does not look like this isn't like a metropolitan area. This is a small upstate New York town. There are many of them. They all have a similar feel, really. You don't expect a lot of dangerous activity.
Something where a Hallmark movie would take place.
Yeah, real pretty at Christmas time.
Right.
Things like that. This particular road that she was crossing, I thought it was listed here, 57. Yeah, 2-lane. You shouldn't be going that fast, really, at that point.
Right.
Outside the town, probably. People probably keep it moving, but this was pretty constricted. This wasn't like a 4-lane, U.S. highway or something.
In 1968, there weren't too many of those to begin with.
No. So there was 3 of them who were crossing. I think it was her cousin. It was Carol Lee, her cousin, and her sister. And they were going to the Victory Market, which I don't think is there anymore. I didn't see it when I looked around. I can look around. Right. But I imagine it was just like a supermarket. And there was an ice cream place like next to it or something near it. And they, I guess they got Carol Lee a cone when they were there.
Right.
So of course the trick-or-treaters, I'm sure, were getting ready to come out at this time as well. It was getting dark. It might have just been dark. It was just before 6:30. So, it would have been probably, I don't know, I have to see exact, but I think it probably would have been getting kind of dark.
Yeah, right.
In late October. So they were crossing back, and, we try to look at every aspect of the case, right? And some people have argued that maybe this wasn't a very responsible crossing, right? Like, Doug's certainly not a good guy, but to be, in the interest of, like, trying to get the entire truth out, was there some blame that can be passed around? I'm a little torn on this, right? Because you listen to the description, her sister was holding her hand, and the cousin had already made it across. Again, this isn't like crossing like I-95. This is like, just take a couple seconds, and you can see pretty well. If you look, kind of pan back and forth, you can see for a long ways. Yeah. It's not like a building right there or somebody can sneak around the building. So she crosses to the median, which is, there's not really much of a median, just the middle of the road. Right. And she's waiting for a car that's coming to go by. Right. Right.
Go in the opposite direction that Doug would be going.
Right. He was going, I believe was he traveling north?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think he was northbound.
They were waiting for a car going southbound.
Right.
Focused on that car. That car was probably hear the engine, so maybe couldn't necessarily hear somebody coming the other direction, especially if they were going too fast, maybe.
It's a little weird, though, right? Because, again, if you look at this area, the visibility is really good.
If it's at dusk and one car has their lights on, the other one doesn't, actually makes a huge difference.
But I thought all the vehicles here had their lights on. Well, they didn't really say.
Yeah, they didn't really say.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, if Doug was driving as intoxicated as it seems he was, it's likely he didn't have his headlights on.
So that might be part of it. She just didn't even see him there at all.
Yeah.
Because of the lights.
I've got a personal anecdote about one. I was 16 years old, stopped at a stop sign at dusk, saw nobody coming, started pulling out. All of a sudden, there's a car there. And I know the lights weren't on because when I pulled out, we didn't collide. He went out into a field and came to a stop, and I came around and completed my turn, but I looked in my rear view. When I looked in my rear view, I saw the lights come on. And like I know, like I would not have seen him coming because of how like the level of ambient light in the general area, and it was a darker colored car. It's easy to miss that when there's no lights to give you a clue. So it could have been like, oh, hey, we see lights on this person coming this way because it's just at dusk. Nothing coming from that direction. And if he's coming quickly, like much more quickly than he would see, and from the distance that supposedly she went,
He was traveling way too fast.
he was traveling way
Very
too fast.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised they didn't see him coming. If he didn't have his lights on and he was moving that quickly.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say this. I would say that I think it was pretty much all on Doug.
Yeah.
Right? But I would say that if you're crossing a 2-lane road like that, better to wait for all the traffic to be out of the way rather than kind of leading, like in baseball, like leading off first base. You don't want to lead. You just want to let them all go by.
Yeah.
There was really no rush at that point. And even if there was, it's not worth your life.
Yeah.
But the headlights being off, I think that explains why the sister didn't see Doug.
But let's be honest. In a small town like that, at that time, 1968, that wasn't exactly known as a high priority on safety
Right.
for pedestrians time period.
Yeah.
Like
or motorists. Seatbelt usage was
everything.
low.
Everything was. New York was a little bit of a pioneer when it came to traffic laws. So like they had more. They were a little bit stricter when it came to that. But even the pedestrian crossing, the best they had was jaywalking laws. And in a small town like that,
Never enforce that.
They would never have that.
No.
So they were just they were crossing probably like they'd done dozens of times, if not hundreds of times in their lifetimes.
Yeah, but it was a legal crossing, right? They were legally crossing. And I think what happened is I think the sister just took her out halfway and just never saw Doug. And he was going so fast, maybe he wasn't even, like she couldn't have seen him.
Right.
Because he was too far away when she ventured out.
I can imagine myself in a situation like that. 15 years old, got my 4-year-old sister, and I'm focused on the car coming the other way. I'm not even thinking, what if there's a car coming that direction? Because honestly, it probably wouldn't affect her. But her sister, obviously being 4 years old, isn't thinking, I should be as close to my sister as I could. Could have been behind her a bit. Who knows?
She was behind her. I think that's what happened, right? The sister, Carol Lee was a little bit behind her.
Yeah.
And I think maybe her thinking was, the sister was maybe thinking, like, I'm keeping her farther away
from the car I
southbound
see.
traffic.
Yeah.
That is definitely a threat.
But there's also like, okay, now we're at the midpoint. I'm already past the northbound threat.
Right.
Like that's
I don't
already,
have to worry out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about that because I'm already halfway across. I'm safely behind that, and there was nothing coming.
As far as she knew.
As far as she knew, so she got Carol Lee, and Carol Lee hasn't quite caught up with her yet.
Right.
But then,
Crossing streets with 4-year-olds, with young kids, is terrifying. Even in parking lots, because our 3-year-old gets it pretty well, but if she sees a car, and I know the car's not, because the car's going slow or whatever, she's liable to just start like running. She's still holding my hand, but she's liable to just start running, and it's very tough for her to understand. That car is not going to hit you. It's not going fast enough to even get close to us. But in her mind, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a threat. I got to just run for it. Which, of course, is so dangerous because she's likely to run toward another car. And there could be a car backing out of a spot and she doesn't see them. Terrifying. And so it's such a tough situation to have a kid anywhere, let alone as a 15-year-old who's not thinking about all the potential threats. Because they're just not there yet in their mind. So it sucks that this happened. And thankfully, I have a little bit more emphasis on safety around vehicles. Of course, vehicles go a little bit faster now than they did back then, I assume. Not only does the vehicle go faster.
I wouldn't assume that.
Well, I don't know. But not only is the vehicles
also,
themselves
50
able to go faster.
50 miles an hour is 50 miles an hour, whether it's in 1968 or 2023.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Right. The cars are able to get there a bit faster and a bit easier, maybe, than they were then.
Oh, yeah. They're much faster now.
Yeah.
Depends on the car.
Yeah.
But by and
fuel
large.
injection. This was almost certainly carbureted. 1962, was it Buick Special?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the Buick Special had taken, 6 months to get up to 80 miles an hour. But
Yeah, this wasn't like Formula One.
Right.
But but if you lay into it, you put your foot into it, on level ground, you can get moving. And I think that he was really driving too fast. He was trying to get like out of town, like north of town, to go somewhere for something. But
and you're crossing the street with a 3 or 4 year old child is very, very dangerous, and you have a lot to consider. But just as dangerous is trying not to cross the street with a 7-month-old 70-pound dog on a leash who has just seen a squirrel on the other side of the road. And it's not dangerous for the dog. It's dangerous for me.
Right. He wants to hold on to the
Who
dog.
needs to hold on to said dog. And suddenly, I don't know, when she hits the end of that leash, like all the energy transfer, and I will get dragged. I don't know how she does it with just like I outweigh her by a lot, but I'm not as much of an anchor.
Somehow
I'm not, but when she just takes off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
I love that dog, but she's tried to kill me at least a dozen times.
I think there's a conspiracy there.
No, I think she's just not paying attention. Just horrible, horrible puppy ADHD.
I think there's something too about when people are crossing a road with two-way traffic or anything with two-way traffic, it becomes confusing. Like these stories of kids crossing behind trains, like a train will go by and they'll cross real quick, but there's another track.
Oh, yeah.
And they get killed. It's just, looking both ways. I know it's a saying, look both ways before you cross the street, but a lot of people don't do that.
Look both ways before you cross the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah, they get fixated, right? They, on what they think is dangerous. So I don't think this was on the sister at all. I think that she was being responsible.
No, yeah.
And probably never even saw Doug, and
Right.
he made no effort of which I'm aware to slow down.
Well, this is kind of the point. Like, nobody really saw him.
Right, no one.
Like, there were virtually no witnesses who could say anything, but they saw some tail lights.
That's all she saw. So she was holding Carolee's hand, and she felt like a tug.
Yeah.
And that was it. And hand, let go. And the sister, she turned and saw the taillights, and then saw 133 feet away, Carolee. The ice cream cone in one of her shoes was
still there.
Yeah, it was still there.
A horrifying thing to think about.
Can't imagine that.
Yeah, that's 133 feet, driven 133 feet. Means that the car that struck her was going fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think the description of the car was like it was speeding away. It made no effort to stop. There was no brake lights.
But being right around that dusk time period is probably one of the major reasons why nobody could pinpoint like a color or a make and model. They just point out, hey, there was taillights. What kind of taillights? Red ones?
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? Because this is a case that people say, well, it's impossible to solve a case in 1968. There were or very little in the way of surveillance cameras. Body cameras wouldn't have helped anyway. They didn't have them then.
Right.
Eyewitnesses are always unreliable, even in the modern age, and there weren't really any. Carolee didn't survive, and nobody else really saw what happened. But this was highly solvable in another sense that, back then, and really probably largely true today, you would expect the motorist that killed Carolee to live in that town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a small town. There weren't nearly as many cars back then. Like having multiple cars, one person having multiple cars was not very common in the late 60s.
Right.
And probably, it was for a while later, but now it's going out of vogue again, right? Like people don't want to have a bunch of cars. They're expensive. And times are tough with inflation.
But depending on where you live, it's still necessary.
Right. Yeah, everybody wants to ride a bicycle or take a subway or whatever, but yeah, tough. It's tough. But probably all they really had to do was look for the car that had damage.
Right.
And there weren't a lot of places to go to get that damage fixed.
Right.
There weren't, the auto parts business was not nearly as robust. You weren't going to go and get the equipment you needed at a Pepperways.
Right.
And try to get rid of the dent and the blood and whatever else is there.
But then Doug Parkhurst comes home crying about how he hit. I think the story changed too, because initially it was hit a like a telephone pole, and then it became like his brother said it was a guardrail that he hit, so right after Carolee gets hit, Doug Parkhurst comes out and goes, "I hit something." And the cops, to their credit at the time, they did talk to him.
Right.
And he said, "Hey, did you hit this girl?" He said, "No." They're like, "Okay, walk away."
Case closed.
Case closed. I mean, we're fine. Like, they didn't even. I think they looked at the car, but they didn't go in depth.
Well, they even measured. He said he hit something specific, and they measured it to see if it lined up, which is a valuable, valuable thing.
That would be a valuable thing to do.
Right,
Yes,
valuable job.
but unfortunately, the police are already doing that.
Right. Go figure. And they
I'm not
measured
sure
it.
if they should, because at this point, like looking back at that, they didn't do a good job of
Not
it.
this specific time.
Not
right.
not in 1968.
And it didn't line up, and I think the officer said that he forwarded it to the chief, and then nothing happened.
Yeah. The guardrail. He said he's hit a guardrail. It didn't match the height.
Right.
They had their guy. This was pretty easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really.
Slam dunk, home run, any sports analogy you want, it's there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hat trick.
Hat trick. There you go.
Yeah.
Wait, no, that would be 3. He'd have to hit 3 of them, and we don't.
Thankfully not.
Thankfully, that didn't happen.
Right.
That did not happen.
Yeah, so apparently this was the decision. I think the article said something about it was the chief that decided
Right.
to let him go, but the rank and file officers were like, "What are we doing?" He killed someone, but still, if they were really that upset, they could have gone somewhere. They could have gone over the head of the chief or told someone.
They could have told a prosecutor or a county prosecutor. Or
Yeah,
They could have gone to the
state
media,
prosecutor.
maybe.
They could have gone to the media.
Yeah.
And then, like Doug Hart Parkhurst, then not too long after that, he joined up to go to Vietnam.
Well, I was thinking too if that was not part of it, right? So back in the Vietnam era, a lot of people did not want to go to Vietnam, mostly because you could get killed.
Right.
And there was actually people that went to Canada. It became kind of a big thing, where later they were pardoned. They were allowed to return to the United States. It was a huge thing. It was a major focal point of
There was a lot of belief that it was an unjust, unjust war.
I think you could make a good case that it was, but that's a whole nother.
Yeah.
That's a big can of worms.
We should have never been in Vietnam.
There's a lot of history going in there that just there was no way we couldn't go in, but we shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Should not have been there.
There was
no need.
There's a lot of stuff going on with that, and it just was not a great situation. But right, Doug Parkhurst was 18 at the time that this happened with Carolee, and I think that might have been part of the whole thing. Was like, he's either going to get drafted or he's going to go volunteer to go to Vietnam, and he could very well die there. So what's the point in prosecuting him here?
Well, my thing would have been like, we know during that era that local police departments were pressured to let things go if somebody was going into the service.
Yeah.
And sometimes basically that was the deal that was made with people.
Right.
Like, when you enlisted was right after you got caught doing something. Because there just weren't enough people that wanted to go and do that.
Right.
It was very unpopular politically.
Yeah.
Very divisive, and it just caused a lot of problems. So if somebody could be kind of manipulated into going, that was a lot better than, sending somebody that that the people didn't want to die,
Right.
to put it frankly, right? There was just people in the community you don't want to die. There's other people you don't care about.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the attitude, like, let the people that are criminals, let them go.
Let's force
serve.
their hand a little bit.
Yeah. That was pretty much what the mentality was. So,
The problem was, I got the same mentality when they came back. Like, oh, you were in Vietnam? We don't want you here.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
They made a movie about that. Stallone made a movie about that. Yeah.
That's hard for people to understand these days. I've noticed that's one of the disconnects with younger people is, during their lives, they've seen people come back from war and be treated as heroes. And of course, that happened even earlier, like in World War II. That was definitely the case, the post-World War II era.
Right.
They were heroes, and they were treated as such, although there was a lot of adjustment problems because we didn't have a mental health system equipped to treat them. But Vietnam was much different. Even Korea, I would say. People came back from Korea were heroes.
Yeah.
When people came back from Vietnam, and they were no less heroes,
Right.
not at all. It was a much different sentiment because the war was so unpopular,
Right.
and they got blamed too, which makes no sense.
Right.
I think Korea was part of the reason why it became why Vietnam was so unpopular, because it was like, hey, part 2, nobody liked the first one.
Yeah, but at
Why
least
did you make a
Korea-
sequel?
I think at least with Korea, people understood what was at stake. Like it was viewed as like we had an objective we could achieve. With Vietnam, it was just a meat grinder. 58,000 dead Americans, and Americans killed a lot of Vietnamese, like a lot.
Yeah.
Difficult to imagine the scale. Like our losses were so profound, but there were single days where thousands of Vietnamese were killed. Like it's just B-52s, the bombers, the Shadow Fortress, extremely effective when those soldiers were caught out in the open, which happened a few times, and they just wiped out thousands and thousands of people.
There was a popular culture element to this as well, with songs and with music. I was just listening. I was in the car this morning, and the song "Give Peace a Chance" by John Lennon and Yoko Ono, I think it's the Plastic Ono band, came on, and my wife said, "Why are they just repeating this 'Give Peace a Chance' thing over and over and over?" Because she, songs like that where people really know what they're doing and they're 5, 6, 7 minutes long, I'm in on that. She hates it. And I'm like, well, it's, it was a protest song. It was something that really gave people a voice, and they were just repeating this phrase as they might in a protest, and they kind of made music to it. And of course, there was a lot of other bands that joined in with the anti-war ideas. So I don't know that we really saw anything like that necessarily with World War II or Korea, but certainly we saw that with Iraq, Afghanistan, not to the extent, I don't think, that we might have seen it in the 60s and 70s, but still, that popular culture, popular media plays a huge role in these kind of things, because it really gives people a voice either way.
Yeah, I would say, as far as World War II, I would say that the United States was very sour on war after World War I.
Yeah.
Where we lost people fighting what we would call the European War. I was repeated, European War. It was their problem, right? And then because of some mistakes that were made, Germany rose up to power again. And of course, we see the war in the Pacific with Japan. We see Germany invade Poland. And the United States didn't want to be involved.
Yeah.
Not at all.
No.
Right.
The president did. But the American people were like, nope.
Right.
We're a pretty powerful industrial nation. We'll defend ourselves. No one's going to cross oceans. And realistically, it would have been very difficult for Germany to invade the United States. It was not logistically possible. In Japan, certainly not. No one was afraid of Japan. Even after the war started, it was just a matter of time before.
That's not true. Japan annexed like most of China.
No,
and,
Japan was never
the
was never
Pacific.
considered a threat by the High Command of the United States. Never. If you look at the strategic formulations of the High Command of the United States, Germany was the country they were worried about because they were technologically advanced and they had a numerical superiority, like in terms of what you saw in Europe. Japan was, from the very beginning, we looked at Japan as like it's a matter of time and unfortunately lives to take them out. It was expensive in terms of lives, but they were never a threat. And Japan really, they made a huge mistake when they attacked Pearl Harbor because they thought the United States, we were big into Hollywood and we were like overweight. Even back then, they thought of us overweight. Now probably more so in our country, but just kind of, they're never going to kind of get off the couch and fight us, and they were wrong.
Right.
Oh yeah, they were.
Yeah.
Now, as far as the American Command, American Command didn't consider them a threat.
Oh, but the rest of the world, sure.
But the rest of the
Oh,
world,
yeah,
they were
very dangerous.
To say that no one considered them dangerous
No.
was not true. 'Cause they took over like the entire eastern coast of Asia.
Yeah, Japan was a war machine.
They were, and
were.
they just kept growing as a war machine as they took over more area.
Yeah.
But you're right. The Americans were more paying attention to the Germans and Italians because they were using tactics nobody used before. The Blitzkrieg,
Right.
was revolutionary as far as war tactic because the First World War was all it was all trenches. It was trench warfare, and the French even built their big long trench across
Right. Yeah.
across the entire country to prevent another war from happening, and then the Germans just went down and around it.
They just went around it. Yeah. And it wasn't actually that well built to start with. So yeah, that was a failed attempt. George Patton understood better than anybody that mobility was the key to modern warfare. You had to be able to move.
Yep.
It had been demonstrated for him very, very well by the Germans.
Yeah.
As they came in quick.
Yeah, they also, I mean, the Germans were also insidious. Like they took the Rhineland back, and we didn't do anything, which is, industrial center, which helped them to build more machines. And they had pretty good aviation technology, pretty good.
Well, during the 1930s, preceding this, there was a huge drive to increase the German airlines. Like they had a huge amount of people joining up to be pilots in German airlines and pilot dirigibles and planes and things for pleasure, for fun. Just going around Europe. We're just going to fly you. We'll fly you from one city to the next. Screw the train. We'll put you on a plane. We'll get you over there. Just a huge increase in number of pilots, so that suddenly when they decided to annex Poland, they had a huge amount of people in their air force, in the Luftwaffe.
Germans were extremely effective soldiers. Even if you listen to the accounts of Americans who fought them, like in North Africa and Italy, they'll tell you that the German soldier was impressive. And they worked well as a unit. Like they worked well with their command structure.
Right.
Much more based on the machine gun than us. Like their squads and everything were laid out different. But they were not cowards. And Japanese were not cowards. Like they were worthy adversaries. And I think, once the United States, it was Pearl Harbor, and then a few days later, Germany declared war on the United States. That was it for Americans. They were like, we're not doing this. But once that happened, we were all in.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And that was really, I think from the beginning, the calculation was we could win. It was a question of how costly would it be.
I think one of the biggest benefits for having America come into the war was the fact that it was so difficult to hit infrastructure in the United States. Was because we just keep building more. Like Britain, all of their infrastructure got bombed out. France, everything got bombed. Germany, we bombed out all the German stuff. It was very difficult for them to build new machines. But America, they didn't hit any infrastructure in the United States.
I think toward the last few years of the war, if I'm not mistaken, we were producing an aircraft carrier a month.
Yeah.
Like there was nothing that Germany and Japan could do in terms of production.
I think
like
right
us.
here in Delaware, I think they set records for ships that they were building, how quickly they were being built. Yeah.
It was just, when your homeland can't be struck effectively, and you have really industrious people that are prone to engineering disciplines, it was a bad recipe for the Axis powers. But either way, the point is, I guess, ultimately, is that it was a popular war in the sense that Americans believed it had to be fought eventually.
Yeah. I mean,
National pride behind it.
Yeah.
There was a national pride behind it, but there was also, they were seeing a lot of the propaganda coming out of Germany. Prior to that, there was a lot of they knew that the Nazi Party was not good for anybody. So all it took was a little spark to get people riled up to go after them. There were people who were leaving the United States before we went to war to go over and join the RAF.
Yep.
So that they could fly, so they could fight, so they could do something for this war because they really believed in it. And then when Pearl Harbor got hit, the whole country was just like, oh, go for it.
That was it. Yeah. It's interesting. I wonder if that would happen these days. I feel like these days people are so politically entrenched that like when a bad, not to get political, but like when a bad politician does rise up, it's very hard to flip people against them.
Right.
And I'm not really singling out anybody specific.
Right.
But I think it's just a general tendency. You could argue it goes both ways.
Right.
Bad is a matter of perspective. So there are people on both sides who are like, that's a bad politician.
We used to agree. I guess we used to agree what bad was, maybe, is what I'm getting at.
Right, yeah.
Right, we used to agree.
And then 9/11 happened. There actually is some data that suggests that the huge divisiveness that we see now, especially between political parties and between liberal and conservative, actually, like 9/11 was the thing that kind of polarized that and started the huge split. Like it was before that in 2001 and 2000, like it was a very narrow margin between And then, like, right after 9/11, on 9/12, the margin was bigger. And it just continued to grow. And I think part of that is because the 9/11 hit changed the American psyche to us or them.
Right.
It
Right.
in the zeitgeist went to there's only us or there's them. And
Yeah.
that has filtered into our political discourse.
That's true.
It's like you're
Yeah.
either with
Good
me
point.
or you're against me.
It's an interesting theory, and I think, if you think about like Pearl Harbor happening these days, right? There would be people who are like, "Oh, it was staged by the government."
Yeah.
How terrifying is that?
That's
right?
deep fake.
Yeah, I mean, there was footage. There was even back then. There
That's
was
deep
footage
fake.
of
That's deep fake footage.
right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, honestly, you can see that right now with the wildfires in Hawaii. People saying it was a government government laser that started it, or intentionally, unintentionally, I don't know. But I mean, that brings us right back to Pearl Harbor, in Hawaii, and so yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
There are also people who believe the world is flat, and there are people who believe that even with all our modern technology, we couldn't build the pyramids. Mm-hmm. And I've seen videos of this. Their proof is just showing clips of OSHA violations, like a big thing falling over because they've overloaded the front end of it. That's their proof that we couldn't do it with modern technology. But
Yeah.
that's the conspiracy-minded stuff, and I think that's seen an increase along with the divisiveness.
I think the United States made a mistake by being so isolationist before World War II, but at least they changed their minds. Mm-hmm. And I don't see that happening. I don't think that would happen again. No. I think that it's just so inflexible. You have to be a flexible thinker, not over the top, but flexible, willing to say, okay, I'll reevaluate based on new data.
That's true.
Okay, Pearl Harbor's bombed. That sounds bad. Now they're trying to kill us. We should go to war, right? But I think the paranoia and the conspiracy theories would flood in these days and make it a big political gridlock.
Mm-hmm. After World War II, then came Korea, and they kind of still understood that because it was there was the rise of McCarthyism, the anti-communist message, a lot of like you have to be American, you have to be pro-American in everything. If you're a communist, you're going to be blacklisted, you're going to lose everything. Mm-hmm. Korea rolled into that because there was we're fighting against the communist Chinese government, so we have to be there. And then that ended for the United States in 1953, and then in 1954 Vietnam started, and people were like, "Wait, we just did this." We just did this, and it was a slow ramp up to where it was at its height, but of the protest. But it started out as an unpopular thing.
Well, it was insidious. Like it was advisors that went over there first, and then it was years before large troop movements. But yeah, I think that
there was still like, hey, we've got this small Asian country. We're going to send people to fight against the communists. It's Korea, right? No, that was the last one. This is Vietnam. Yeah. It's in the same general area. Yeah. Like on a globe, depending on the size of the globe, you could put like a quarter over top of where those two countries are, separated by a huge distance. But to the American mindset, it's the same area. Wait, we just came out of there. Why are we going back in there? Mm-hmm. So politically, it was unpopular from the beginning.
Yeah.
And then when they started sending more troops in, the people who had been in Korea were like, "Whoa, you're just doing this again? You're drafting people again?" It became very, very unpopular and continued.
Well, and I think just at the rate at which people were dying in Vietnam became alarming.
Oh yeah,
and
it became hugely alarming for that.
Yeah, and in a place where we had massive technological superiority, like, but it was just not an environment that we were prepared to fight in. Mm-hmm. And really, I think we didn't know who we were fighting, and they didn't know why we were fighting. Like, it was very confusing.
It was incredibly confusing because there wasn't a remember Pearl Harbor,
right? Yeah.
Moment that coincided with that. It was just like, wait a minute, why are we here?
Yeah, and the people we were trying to free were also highly corrupt, and there was a lot, like, it didn't seem like there was a clear good guy and a clear bad guy
No rally call behind a certain event or anything either.
No. And
You
it just
had
continued. And
ununiformed combatants, right, which we didn't see in World War II. At least in World War II, you Japanese uniforms, German uniforms. It was much different in Vietnam.
Yeah.
It was not a place anybody wanted to go, but moving back to the story, Doug went there.
Right.
Doug did go there. Yeah.
Doug went in the Air Force. He would later tell people, I think, that he killed a bunch of people in Vietnam, but as it turns out, he was actually a cook. And I did a little research on this just in case I missed something in all the documentaries I've watched about war. Statistically, very unlikely that a cook in the Air Force would ever even touch a weapon other than training.
Right.
I think what he may have been referring to is the old like showbiz killing,
Right. Or the food.
Like I killed them all.
I'm not saying which
great.
side I killed them on.
Right. It's like there were a few people who had to go to sick bay after dinner. I hear one
killed it in
I
there.
hear one didn't make it. Or like he's doing a server, like he's serving on the line and just making jokes, and people are cracking up. It's like, I killed it.
I killed it.
Killed in here. I killed in Vietnam.
That must have been it, because he didn't kill any Vietnamese
He
or
did not.
Anybody, NVA, no one. He was discharged in 1971 too, very short. I would expect a little bit longer for that era in Vietnam.
Even
July 1969 to June 1970. I guess that was right. I guess that's about right.
even the Air Force has always been the cushy branch. I mean, dangerous as it is for the pilots like when they're going into an active zone, even there, like if you're flying a plane, going on a bombing run, or even a visual run, like a recon run, it can be very, very dangerous for those pilots. But like everybody else in the Air Force, which is like 75 to 80%, they're the people who work on the planes.
Right. Yeah.
or provide for those pilots. Those pilots are incredible danger almost from the moment they take off. Everybody else gets to stay back at the airfield. Yeah. And in modern day, they get to stay in the air conditioning. Mm-hmm. And some of them get to stay in the air conditioning in a plane hundreds and hundreds of miles away from where they're flying the drone.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's right.
Right. I'm going to sit in this plane while somebody else flies, and I'm going to fly this remote control plane that's hundreds of miles away while I do my thing, which has become a huge mental health issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That vicarious trauma of like, I'm responsible for killing so many people. All I did was push a button. Mm-hmm. But coming to realize that I'm responsible for that. Yeah. That the sheer amount of safety that I have, it's like there's a difference. It is still a traumatic event, but there's a difference when you're fighting for your life against another person, and you can see face to face. It's another thing to go, click. 20 people are dead. Mm-hmm. Wait, what?
Yeah, much different.
Right.
Yeah, even if you look at like bombers, I mean, you can get shot down or whatever. It's dangerous. So, but yeah, drones are different. There's a lot of PTSD being reported with the drone operators. I don't think that Doug had PTSD, though. I think that
probably not. I mean, he might have had PTSD from people eating his food and going to
attacking him
and then attacking him. I don't know whether he was a good cook or not. I can't actually say that. Yeah. Never having tasted any of his food, thankfully.
Wasn't a good driver.
I was not alive at the time he would have been cooking.
Yeah, not a good driver, that's for sure.
If his driving's any indication, though.
Mm-hmm. Well, he started drinking heavily when he came back. Obviously he was drinking heavily when he went. I mean, stands to reason.
Which is an interesting thing to me is one of the features that he kind of would still have for most of his life was a love for fast cars.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Rather ironic.
Mm-hmm. Ironic, like he has this massive thing where he in his estimation at the time, hit and killed somebody in a fast car, and he goes and gets faster cars. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to
drive them even faster.
Yeah,
maybe a bit of a sensation seeker. Yeah, but he was interesting. The descriptions, the way people described him. Now, he married and he had 3 sons. People called him angry, isolated, mean, physically brutal, and hateful. So
That's actually exactly what I would expect from someone with PTSD at that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think he had PTSD, but maybe he did from killing.
Very likely, the PTSD would have come from the incident with Kaylin. Like that's very real. But he held on to that as well. Like that was been completely undiagnosed and would have continued to get worse and worse over time because he's trying not to think about it. The alcohol very much plays a role in that.
Whatever maybe kind of hate he got from being at Vietnam too, potentially, or whatever he felt from maybe even the media or something that might have encouraged him to just feel bad in general. Could have just, that whole season of his life could have just made things go downhill even more.
Well, before the statute of limitations was up in December 1974, he confessed to being the murderer at a party. I assume it was a Christmas party, I don't know. And the person he confessed to
Might have been a Halloween party.
told somebody else, and they went to the police. Should have been case closed.
Right.
Second chance.
Yeah.
Easy. He confessed. That was it.
Yeah.
They decided that following up would be a lot of work.
Yeah. Don't really want to rush into these things.
They probably looked at the case file this thin. Said, man, getting more data than that, that'd be tough. You want to go to Dunkin' Donuts?
Yeah. They really...
Anyway, that's a cold case. You have to wait another 30 years before cold cases are going to be a thing. So
Wait until the shows come out. And
like
the
right,
articles
like in 1970. Wait till you get to the early 90s, then we'll start seeing stuff. 2000s will be way better because there'll be a cold case show, and like the popularity of cold case units will come up, and we'll see that. So, but this is too old for us to deal with. It's cold.
Yeah, they could have solved this so easily.
Right.
It's
Well,
frustrating.
in 75, it would have been difficult to put it in the microwave. Heat it up a little bit.
So that was it. So after that, the statute of limitations would expire sometime later, and that was it.
Well,
never caught.
Yeah. Well, no. In 2013, he went and confessed to the police.
Well, in 2012, there was a message posted on Facebook, and that led, apparently someone else knew.
Right.
I guess a relative, I forget the story, a relative of Doug's, maybe his sister or something.
Somebody else had been told this story, and
Yeah, well, his a relative of his, thought maybe it was his sister, it was his sister, had asked somebody else, basically if they would say that they were with Doug because he had somebody.
Right.
So they knew.
corroborate an alibi.
Yeah, they knew.
But the thing when he did speak to police himself in 2013, and he even said
They went to him.
If police then had pushed me on it, I would have said that yes, I did it. Like he told them initially, first blush, no, I hit a guardrail, and he said if they had pushed me then, I would have told them I did it,
and we wouldn't be talking about this.
and we wouldn't be talking about this.
Right.
And that's the thing. Like the police dropped the ball on it.
Yeah.
In 1968.
And again, 1975.
And then in 1975, again, in 75, if they'd gone to him and asked him about it, he probably still would have said, yeah, I did it.
He obviously wanted to tell someone. He told the person at the party.
Yeah.
And he knew something was liable to happen to him at that point.
He wanted to get it out there, but like the police never came to him and said, did you do it? Until well after the statute of limitations was up.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the kind of mindset that he was experiencing at that point? Went to Vietnam, experienced whatever he experienced. Whether he was a cook or whatever, he might have experienced something. He very likely saw some kind of, the kind of situation over there. Just people dying and soldiers dying and hearing about it, maybe even seeing it. Who knows? But here he is, 1975, at a party, back in civilian life. Had a few years to kind of think about all of that. Not only 1968 when he hit Cara Lee, but also Vietnam, and just where his mindset was at that point. I'm sure there was something going through his mind of, this doesn't feel right. I don't feel right, for a variety of reasons, which maybe led to him, maybe it was alcohol too, probably was, but led to him telling somebody else about it. But he was clearly kind of recognized at some point, maybe, that he needed to talk about this, or at least that he wanted to. He couldn't just keep this on him any longer, which, of course, he did, and nothing came of it. So, all right, I guess I'm keeping my secret now.
Well, when the police initially, or when they approached him in 2013, he denied it then initially.
Right.
He said I was 99.9% sure that he didn't do it.
Right.
And then later he said, I don't know what to tell you, I don't remember. Even when the prosecutor said, I'll give you a written document saying I'm not going to.
I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to.
And then,
Right?
and
But
then
I
it
can't.
moved, and then it moved on to later. He said, "I know in my heart that I hit that little girl."
Mm-hmm.
Well, he put it in writing. I think it was a few days later or so. Put it in writing that he believes that he did do it. He was sorry and so forth.
Yeah. He said that he was driving through the city of Fulton when he heard a thud. It sounded like a dog. He described a building that he was near, like, I guess to verify his location. He told the police he was in an accident. He didn't see what he hit, didn't stop. Don't remember hitting the brakes. He left the town, but he knew in his heart that he killed Carol Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what gets me though is again, it has to tie back into that. I think it has to tie back into that mentality of, oh well, we'll send him off to Vietnam for this, because they didn't even try charging him with DWI.
Mm-hmm.
And New York has been on the DWI bandwagon since 1910. 58 years on the books with DWI laws in that state. Like, they could have nailed him just for saying I was drunk and behind the wheel. They could have put him on that and at least done something. But he went to they didn't do anything with that.
Yeah. I mean, you think about these days, not that everything's better now than it was in 68, but a little girl gets run down the street. I think the police would try to close that case.
Yeah.
I think you're right. And I hate to say this, but especially if it's a little white girl. Like, there's a statistical thing about that in the media.
Look at like the Madeline McCann case.
Right.
Right? I mean, probably the most famous missing person case in maybe all of history. But would it be that way if she was a minority?
I don't know. Maybe the Lindbergh baby might be just as famous. But again,
yeah.
Lindbergh was white.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We get into the media, it becomes this huge thing, especially in the United States. We saw that with Gabby Petito. There was a lot of big outcry about that. About if pretty white girl goes missing, there's an outcry. But then there's hundreds of minority women going missing, and now nobody bats an eye. But today, a little girl gets hit. It's gonna get media attention.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's going to be a push to solve it. Right. 1968. I don't know. Maybe they thought that he wasn't. They couldn't DWI him because it wasn't hard liquor; it had just been beer.
It makes no sense. I mean, they could have leaned on everybody, and back then they wouldn't have been above that. Not that I recommend that strategy, but if they wanted to solve it, they would have leaned on his family members.
Yeah,
they'd have been threatening to put them in jail. Like making up charges. They didn't care back then. There was no body cameras.
Right.
So,
but it wasn't quite yet the 70s, so they weren't like dropping coke on him and trying to lock him up. That would be a couple of years before that happened. But at the same time, there's always been a good old boys club, but also we don't ruin a young man's life kind of mentality. During that time period, there was.
Yeah, they were opposing forces.
He's 18. I'll give him his chance in Vietnam. If he comes back from that, he'll have seen so much.
Well, again, I think the thinking was every person like that goes, you don't have to send somebody that you want to live, right? Like, so they were doing the world a favor as their mentality.
Yeah.
So that was it. So he confessed eventually, and he moved to a small town outside Sanford, Maine, which is a small town itself in Maine. And now, purportedly, he had cancer. He told people he had cancer, and that it was terminal. I don't know if that's true or not.
Supposedly, he'd had cancer several times and beat it. I don't know. I haven't seen medical records. If he did, and he beat it, great for him. I do know, like, there was an interview with one of his neighbors that said he was taking him to the hospital a couple of times and whatnot.
So maybe it was true, but I'm like suspicious of him because he also claimed he wiped out all those people in Vietnam, which never happened. So he was a liar, but maybe he was maybe he felt like it was going to get him, or maybe he really was terminal. It's a shame we can't know, because I think it could speak to his frame of mind. During the incident in the ballpark. But
right.
So that brings us to 2018. Doug is 68 at this time, and he gets introduced, in a manner of speaking, to a 51-year-old named Carol Sharrow. She was a resident of Sanford, Maine, who had, according to reports, been diagnosed with bipolar 1. Mm-hmm. So this there we would expect mania, for certain, right?
Right.
And depression, and with, bipolar, you have the hypomania and depression.
Right.
It's interesting because I see a lot of people who believe that bipolar 1 is more serious.
Mm-hmm.
It's just different. They're both serious.
Right. Right.
But bipolar 1 is the disorder where you would expect a full-on manic episode.
Right.
And there's a special danger with that type of mania.
Yeah.
Although I've seen people hypomanic, they can get pretty rambunctious, do some things that aren't smart.
Yeah.
But mania is a fascinating condition if you think about it, because we're so fixated on depression.
Right. Right.
Right. We got major depressive disorder. Major depressive disorder is way more common than bipolar. Way more.
Oh yeah.
Right. I think it's like 25 times as many diagnosed cases. So we're like, oh, life is tough. I'm down. I'm sad. I'm depressed. The world isn't going well. Kind of all those kind of like, I'm worthless.
Yeah.
I'm not eating right. I'm not sleeping right. Everybody understands what depression is. It makes sense. It's sad, right? It's unfortunate, but everybody understands like what it means, like what depression would look like.
Yeah.
Or most people understand. Mania doesn't make sense to people. Like, you try to explain mania to people who've never seen mania or had a relative who is manic. It's like, wait, so just like you can be too sad, you can be too happy? Yes, that's exactly what can happen.
Yeah.
But why would you be too happy? It doesn't matter why. It's something that happens. I've seen it happen to people.
Right.
What are they happy about? I don't know. I'm just telling you what happens.
Yeah.
It happens. They're happy about everything, and they're looking to be more happy.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
They're
Really-
trying to be more
trying to
happy.
pass
Really
the
add on
happiness.
to what they're experiencing.
Oh yeah. The manic episodes, even hypomanic episodes, can be like less. I've described it as like your mood turned up to 11, right? For a manic episode, hypomanic is like turn it up to 8, like consistently for a longer period of time. Like the hypomania tends to last a little bit longer than the full-on manic episode, in my experience. But it's and that's probably why it can be just as damaging, is because it can last for like a month. Like just being up here, not up here, but up here consistently, with still a streak of trying to find more pleasure and build up on it, and still a easily distracted by stuff, goal-oriented decisions with no follow-through. Right? I'm going to start a fudge shop. It's going to be great. I can make good fudge. I really make good fudge, especially with these box mixes. I make great fudge. I'm going to go make a fudge shop. I'm going to go get a loan from the bank. Sweet, I got $50,000 in loan. Wait, can we go to Vegas?
I got $50,000. Now I can use it. Yeah. I can make $100,000 tonight.
Yeah. I can double the amount of money that I can put into this fudge shop, man.
We cover a lot of tangents, right? But imagine packing about 1 million times as many tangents into one of our. That's what mania would look like.
But a full manic episode is like 7 days of that, but no sleep.
No sleep. That's the psychosis. That's where you see the hallucinations and delusions.
Yeah, no sleep and hallucinations, delusions starting to come up. Still trying, like, I've got to do this thing, and then getting stuck on one idea and just going, full force into it when you have no way of following through at all. It's like throwing yourself at a brick wall.
There's a lot of gambling in many different ways. Literal gambling,
Right.
if it's available, but also just risky behavior.
Right.
A lot of spending money, and this is whether you have it or not.
Right.
A
Credit
lot
card
of-
debt.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Running up tremendous debt. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
A lot of sex for certain people with mania. Not everyone. That's one's like, if it happens, it happens. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. But when somebody is has those desires and the mania hits, I've seen some numbers that are just staggering, like staggering.
$150,000 in debt. What did you do?
Well, I mean, like in terms of sexual context. Like I've seen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like people that.
Like Wilt Chamberlain is.
Yeah. Like like he wrote in his book, I think 10,000, right? So you see, like, you talk to somebody in the morning, and like, okay, you're going to come in tomorrow to see like someone else because we're monitoring this and we're worried that you might have to go to the hospital, whatever. And then like you check in a few times though in the day. Like 4 hours later, they've slept with like 8 people. Mm-hmm. Like how many of them did you know? Oh, none.
No, none of them.
Probably hospital time. It probably was hospital time when they let you go the first time. Right. You also see, like you're talking, the business planning. That to me is like just you see that and you're like, yeah, that's mania. Like, I'm going to build a castle. What in my yard? Oh, okay.
I got all these bricks over here, and I'm just going to start building.
There was. You talk about that. There was a guy when I was working inpatient. There was a guy, one of my first patients, who had like full-on manic episode while in the inpatient setting. He did not sleep for a week. Like he was awake for 7 days at our facility. They gave him tranquilizers, and it did not work. He was going around. They had like gravel and rocks that people, painted and put like positive recovery messages and everything on. He went around at night while everyone was asleep, and he would make like pyramid stacks of stones just everywhere. Like you walk up this. There's a set of stairs outside. There was just like on every stair was stacks on either side going all the way up. And then like some places where he shouldn't have been able to get to had these stacks, these pyramid stacks of rocks. And like the more risky placement it was, the bigger the rocks he got up there. And it was just out of control. But that's where the mania comes in. I think that a lot of people don't understand about bipolar is that it's not. It very rarely is just a rapid shifting of mood throughout the day. A lot of people who are like, "Oh, I'm bipolar because I'm 1 minute I'm up and the next minute I'm down, and then I'm back up, and then I'm really angry, and then I'll do." Well, that's emotional turmoil, and we should talk about why there's that rapid shifting of mood, but that's not bipolar.
No, there's a rapid cycling, and there's like I think a very rapid cycling and all this, but realistically, people go into a manic phase or a depressive phase. And you can usually see there was a mixed episode too, which gets really wild sometimes. Yeah. But normally you can tell. But for me, like if you have somebody who has been manic before and you start talking to them in session, they start talking about the business thing, that's a telltale sign. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like, because usually it's like they're just gonna float it out there gently because they don't want to get caught, right? They know that you're looking for the mania. It's like I had this idea where I was going to get some money together, and I heard this idea from my brother. You can start this business down in Atlantic City. Are you going manic on me? No, definitely not manic. No.
I swear this one's going to work out.
The mania is trying to hide itself. I love narrative therapy idea. Like the mania is trying to hide it, right? Like the mania is trying to dude. Don't talk about the business. Don't talk. Yeah, but anyway, there's this business idea. Shh, I told you not to talk about it. All right, if you're going to bring it up subtly. See if he wants to invest.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Right? It seems, and that's what it seems like sometimes. But you get the bipolar is just, that's why it's so nasty. Mm-hmm. But the depression, a lot more depression. The other thing I constantly have had to tell people, especially in inpatient, is no, you don't have depression and bipolar. As soon as a manic episode comes in and you've had a depressive episode, it is bipolar. It's
a one-way street too.
It's a one-way street. Mm-hmm. It doesn't go back to being just depression. Nope. Like you've had a manic episode. Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's now. It's
one of the few gateways. Like once you cross through the bipolar gateway, you can never be diagnosed with MDD, ever. Even if it happened 50 years ago, you can't. Like, although people still do.
I mean, you can always challenge a diagnosis. And I've had people who are like, they've gotten the diagnosis of bipolar either by somebody who wasn't trained.
Right, they can argue that it was wrong.
They can argue that it's an error. Or like the biggest one is like they get asked questions when they're going inpatient somewhere, like at a drug and alcohol rehab. Mm-hmm. And this is where it's unexcusable to me, is they get asked questions about, have you ever felt, incredible euphoria? Have you ever felt, engaged in this, goal-oriented material? They ask all about all the symptoms. And the person's like, yeah, uh-huh, yeah, And they're like, okay, bipolar, because they had a manic episode. But the question they really should ask, because it's in the DSM-5, they really should ask, were you smoking crack or meth at the time?
Yeah.
Because the answer there's going to be, yeah, I was. It's like, okay, well, then we're going to try and rule out bipolar because it's instituted by the drugs, by stimulant, massive use of stimulants. And then like the depressive side of things can be from the massive use of central nervous center depressants. So let's look at whether these are present. I always tell people, like, wait a few years into your sobriety, into recovery, before you start challenging your mental health act. Because if you do have bipolar disorder and you're clean on drugs and you have a manic episode, we know it's a manic episode. We know it's not just the use of stimulants. We can now clarify that. Now, the one gentleman I had was clearly a manic episode. He was not on stimulants at the time because he didn't have any substances in his system. They were drug testing him almost hourly, like 3-4 times a day, just to be like, he's got to be on something. Like, no, he's just manic. We need to send him to a hospital because he's going out of his gourd here. We need to get him really stabilized there before he can engage in his treatment here. But
Yeah. Now, with the course of bipolar 2, so the person we're talking about here is 51, and I don't know her whole history. I don't know anything about her except what's been reported. But you typically...
there was some I read about her being diagnosed early.
Did she have for a while?
About 18. There was an incident when she was 18 years old.
Okay.
And her daughter grew up with her having...
Okay. So she
very
had
familiar
having
with the
very
triggers.
familiar with triggers and things like humidity,
Change of the
summertime,
seasons,
change of the seasons, and
big life events,
Yeah.
big family events. Yeah.
So sometimes often what happens as a matter of course, is that the depressive episodes become more frequent. So that's another thing about bipolars. People think they alternate. Like you go from mania to depression. You sometimes, right? And I think sometimes that's because the drugs that you're given can be prescribed incorrectly. But that's not necessarily the case. I've seen people go from mania to non-symptomatic to mania to non-mania, and then maybe depressed later, and then go depressed for like 10 times in a row.
Yeah.
But either way, the manic states decrease as you get older, and you have more depressive states, which is sad a lot of times for people who have it, because some look forward to the mania, because the mania is as high as you can ever, anyone can ever get, right? At 51, I would expect that there would be a shortening of the manic, like you wouldn't see as many manic episodes.
Yeah, but a lot of the mania, especially for her, there was a pattern of mania being triggered by things like big life events and big changes, especially happy ones. Right. And her daughter was getting married.
Yeah, she was on her way to
she was on her way for the wedding planning.
Right.
Like her daughter was coming to pick her up so that they could go do wedding planning things. So there's this major thing that she really wants to be in her daughter's life. She wants to stay connected, and her daughter's on her way. There's big life events happening, so it's a really happy time.
She doesn't want to be defined by the bipolar as much anymore.
But I think that huge surge of dopamine and serotonin from like this is my happiest moment of my life with my daughter getting married, like that could easily be a major trigger for mania, which then just whoop, everything's up.
And her daughter was very worried because she's seen the cycle before, right? Big life events or just change in seasons for that matter, and was worried because she knew this was one of those times, such a big happy life event that had triggered things before.
Right. Yeah, bipolar is frightening that way. It's a life-destroying illness.
Right.
It is.
Right.
It's one of the cruelest disorders in the DSM. I put up there with schizophrenia, maybe not quite as bad, but it destroys lives.
I lived with a guy that experienced his first manic episode while I was living with him, and while I was living with him, it wasn't awful, but at some point I realized that he was only sleeping on an air mattress in his room, an air mattress that he had bought with a credit card. He was terribly in debt, and the air mattress was like bigger than the room was, and he had put duct tape and microphones and all kinds of stuff in the closet to start this podcast about God knows what, and had been doing the podcast at night or something. Well, nobody else was aware of it. Nobody else was awake. And so eventually we go in this room, and the room smelled awful, for one thing. This was in my house, by the way. So I'm pissed because now there's duct tape on the walls I just painted. And I'm like, what's this guy doing? And then you realize that it's just way off.
Was this during the time when you were going out trying to measure guardrails?
That's exactly right. I was doing that at night. And, that was my first taste of, wow, this is horrible.
So just to be clear, this was before he became a counselor.
Yeah.
Because he was still on
guardrail duty.
Guardrail duty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think bipolar is also a struggle for law enforcement to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked before, I think, about how there have been cases where people with mania have taken all their clothes off and run down the street, and the police have to chase them. It's happened a few times.
No, I don't believe that's
there's something
ever
liberating, I guess, to just to get rid of them clothes. Yeah. Well, it's like a new idea, right? Like we don't need clothes. Like they're always discovering something new.
Right.
They're manic.
What a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's because the should I do it filter gets turned off, right? As soon as a thought comes into head, it's act on that thought.
Can I do it?
Immediately.
Yes. Yes, I definitely can.
I'm really hot. I think I'd like to take my shirt off, and the shirt's on the floor before they even finish that thought. And
Yeah.
But police definitely generally don't know how to deal with that. I mean, I'm sure a few have taken, especially like sociology or social worker courses that have done it. I know Newcastle County has their behavioral health unit where they're pairing a social worker or counselor with a police officer, and the police officer is basically only there for backup if it's necessary. Mm-hmm. If a person is absolutely behaviorally uncontrollable, but they let the counselor or social worker take the lead in that, which is way better.
So so we talked about before recording. We were talking about this ESPN article that was made. Really good article. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of ESPN. We touched on that because I'm not that big into sports. A few times I've turned it on years ago, I think, and it was like golf. I just don't get it. Yeah. Was it George Carlin? George Carlin had a routine about sports, right? Mm-hmm. He talked about golf like, you hit the ball and you find it, you're a winner. Just put it in your pocket, you're a winner, walk away. Instead, they hit it again. Right? But it was a good article, but it did have this segment about the baseball diamond that we're going to be talking about. Yeah. Which was
Goodall Field, I believe.
Goodall Field in Sanford, Maine.
Sanford, Maine, Goodall Field. I am an appreciator of history. I really do. So he started off that segment of the article with, like, Thomas Sanford had this great idea for providing horse blankets to the Union Army during the Civil War. I was like, I'm in. Awesome. That's great.
Tell me more about the horse blankets.
That's great. No, he started these mills and started doing things, and he put his name on a theater and a town hall, and
really built this town up.
And it's like, and then they put his name on the baseball diamond, and then it's like they're Casey at the bat at that point. Like they're talking about the wonders of the baseball field, and like the only name I recognized out of the whole thing was Babe Ruth. Mm-hmm. But it's you can't. Babe Ruth is ubiquitous with America at this point. Like you can't live in this country and not have heard of Babe Ruth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very famous baseball player who I guess visited Goodall Field, and I guess he hit a ball that hit.
He hit a home run. Like
the ball hit something like a store.
Apparently, like he had 2 strikes and 2 balls, and then he like hit a 800-yard home run or something like that. And like the way it was written, the language that was used, I was like, wait, oh right, 1920s. That makes sense.
But didn't it hit like a building?
Yeah.
And the building's still there or something?
Yeah, and they put a marker on it, something like where the baseball hit or something.
I think to me that really sums up why sports aren't interesting to me. Like, so a guy has a bat and he hits a ball and the ball hits a building. Is that really the highest endeavor of the human condition? Like, I feel it's almost like we don't have enough to think about or worry about. Let's just make stuff up that, like, okay. But he was a great baseball player, Of course.
I'm with you. I'm not a big sports fan. I don't really like watching sports at all. But you put a sports movie on, and I'm down for that.
They are
like
good.
Friday Night Lights, amazing.
Yeah.
Like the TV series was great too. Like I'm not even a football fan, but I loved Friday Night Lights. Remember the Titans, Hoosiers, back in the day.
Basketball.
You put on a Mighty Ducks. I grew up with the Mighty Ducks. That was one of my favorite movie series growing up.
Wasn't it Miracle on Ice movie? Was that
Miracle on Ice.
Adam Sandler's came out, has a movie, Hustlers, Hustler or Hustlers or something like that. A sports movie that was really good.
Like I don't like sports, but I'll watch a sports movie because you get drama in it. Like you get a lot of drama. You got the build up.
Right.
And
there's a lot of hope and a lot of here's this big message of breakthroughs and coming out on top and whatever.
Your Field of Dreams.
Yeah.
Right. Even the Rocky movies, which are now the Creed movies. But like they're sports movies. I don't generally like watching boxing. As at this point, it's a little bit of jabbing and crossing and then hugging. There's a lot more of that than there is of punches being thrown. And I was like, the pageantry of it is not my
Sweet
tasting.
Science, right? The Sweet Science, yeah.
But the Rocky movies are some of my favorite movies of all time.
Which have pretty unrealistic
They
boxing,
do.
right?
They do.
Which there's a lot of headshots without people going down.
Which is interesting because like Sylvester Stallone's trained in boxing. Like he trained in boxing. That's why he wrote the movie.
Now, somebody could easily, I agree with you guys, sports really doesn't do it for me. Obviously, very impressive training that goes into that. And
Says the man
abilities.
wearing the Nike shirt.
Right, which I got from Goodwill or something like that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right. Yeah, because I would ever spend money on Nike stuff. So, obviously, very impressive athletes, right? They've trained so hard for these things. They're so good at it and everything, but just not my thing. But people could easily say that about music. So, for example, here in Delaware, George Thorogood grew up in Delaware.
Delaware
school in
Destroyers,
Wilmington, right? The Delaware Destroyers. And I don't know that it's still there. I think it is. But the house where I think he either bought the house, I think they recorded an early album there or something here in Delaware. There's a plaque out front identifying this is where George Thorogood lived in his early 20s when they kind of just started the band. He was just recording things like that. And that's cool to me. I think that's cool. Like, I remember it, and I think it's cool. My wife sees that, and she's like, who cares? Like, why would they ever spend taxpayer money on that plaque? And I'm like, yeah, but, and easy for me to defend that.
Yeah,
Just like it'd be easy for somebody else to be like, yeah, but sports. So we've all got our
But
thing.
to be fair, that plaque didn't cost that much to put up.
Well, yeah, I agree with you. I agree, and I'm right there with you. But to me, that's meaningful. That means something. I understand that. I don't understand sports, but everybody's got their thing, and that's all right.
To an extent, I get where you're coming from with the music. Like there's never going to be another place where George Thorogood was recording in his early 20s. Like that's the place. Like that's where he did that. You get places like certain places where movies were shot. Like they shot this here. Like and there's some like Dead Poet Society was shot in Delaware. Like there's places like you can go down and be like that's where Dead Poet Society. Right. Great movie. That's where that was shot. Like that's never going to happen again. A sports ball player hitting a home run or making a touchdown, like that might happen next week.
Mm-hmm. Almost certainly will. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
With sports ball.
With sports ball, specifically sports ball.
The very well-known sport of sports ball.
Yes, it's a catch-all. It covers all of the sports.
With
like,
the points
I
and the
don't,
games and the fields and the. Yeah.
I don't like. I know some about some of the sports. I don't care for them as much. There are people who do, and I don't generally look down on people who like sports. I just don't. But I know Babe Ruth hit a home run there. It was in the article, but the article spent quite a lot of time discussing the sports side of things.
Yeah, it really did. Yeah.
And we came to the conclusion it must have been something like contractually because it's ESPN, they had to include like 30% of the article had to be about sports. In order
Otherwise, it just can't be on their website.
Yeah, like the editor was just like,
calculating.
How is this about sports?
Calculating word count. Guys, you're at 29. Add some more sports in.
Right. Like the first draft had nothing about sports in it other than a baseball field, and the editor's like,
come on.
Where's the sports?
Right, it's the new guy that wrote it, and he didn't get it.
This is Espen. Like, where's the sports? For real, for a while I thought it was pronounced Espen. Like,
That's how out of touch you are with sports.
Back in the 90s, like I figured it out fairly quickly, but there was a time when I was younger where I thought it was Espen for a second, and then they were like ESPN. I was like, oh, okay.
I think sports are at their highest when you can tie it to a personal story. Like, I don't have time anymore, but years ago, I used to watch the Summer Olympics when it would come on, and a little bit of the winter. And there's like the national pride.
Yeah.
Or even if it's a country that, you're not in, not the United States, it's interesting to see like people striving for excellence.
Yeah,
You're still rooting for them to kind of overcome, like to break a record or whatever. But like the sports like, football, baseball, golf, tennis, whatever, that you see every week, it's hard to get, like, I don't care. I don't care. Like the Olympics, I find more interesting, and certain events like the Super Bowl. I'll watch once in a while, not most of the time.
I try and watch the commercials and the Super Bowl.
It's great commercials.
That's the best part of it. Like, I don't really care about the game.
Yeah, I think there's an element you can appreciate with the Super Bowl, that it's high stakes. Like all those people's lives will be changed if they win. They get the ring, whatever. Like,
well, some people's lives will change. Others will continue to be millionaires.
Right. and continue developing irreversible brain damage.
That's true too.
Yeah.
Which it's funny. All the sports that I originally liked when I was younger involved brain damage.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Auto racing, football, and boxing. I can't pick one that doesn't involve somebody's head getting permanently damaged.
Oh, is it really a sport if someone can't get their head damaged? Like if their brain isn't somehow in danger, does it really count as a sport? I mean, hockey. I do love me some hockey. Like I used to play hockey. I don't really watch it, but I used to play, and it's fascinating to see how fast that puck can whip at somebody's head, and how fast somebody can throw off their gloves to fight.
That's right.
That's a thing. But like that's brain damage. They have to wear helmets now. That didn't used to be a thing, but they can wear helmets now. So there's an aspect of potential brain damage there. Auto racing, as you said, I used to love auto racing. Then I just kind of like got bored of the left-hand turns.
Right. Well, there's all kinds of. When I was young, I don't know if it's still done, but there's not exactly auto racing, but demolition derby was a big thing.
Yep.
Now that's probably considered
I'm not sure if you can call that a sport. Like, it still happens. Like there are still demolition derbies. I'm not sure you can call it a sport because it's not really like who wins a demolition derby.
The last car
degrees
standing.
of loser.
The last car running.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that car's not in condition to do it again tomorrow.
Nope.
And
today.
what did you really win? Right, you won a
You won
busted
a
up
county
car.
fair. That's what
You won a
won.
county fair, busted up car. Like, the most dangerous sport in the world, though, I gotta say, is rodeo. Right, 8-second ride, and you might break your pelvis, or both of your legs, or something, and then most of them will heal up and try and do it again.
Well, looking at the sport involved here, baseball, it doesn't make the news a whole lot in terms of what we would see, because we don't follow sports. But when it does, it's somebody getting hit with a baseball. Either the person at bat, right, or the pitcher. When, sometimes it's line drive right at their head.
Right.
I think they call them comebackers, right, when they pitch and it comes right back and hits them. So those are really scary, and I think the element there is that baseball is pretty boring. That's my takeaway is it's pretty boring, but sometimes
I agree.
it can be extremely exciting for just a moment. And that's what happened in 2018.
And that's where Carol Shero comes in.
That's right.
Carol Shero definitely made that particular game very, very exciting. Now, there are people who play baseball and they find every game to be exciting and wonderful. And I if that is your thing, that is amazing. Because there are definitely some TV shows that I watch that I find amazing and wonderful every single time I watch them. And people will be like, really? This is a snore fest. Like,
Yeah.
But yet, definitely when something happens, it happens. Right? The only baseball game I ever went to was a Phillies game. I was trying to sleep until the 7th inning when somebody got a home run and broke their bat. And the only reason that I found that exciting was because there was a crack in the back. The bat went spinning across the infield as it took off. And I'm like, wow, that's exciting. Can we go home now?
I saw part of a minor league game once up in Wilmington. That was it. That's the entirety of my baseball.
Oh, the Blue Rocks.
Spectating.
My kid's favorite part of a Blue Rocks game, every time the Blue Rocks score a home run, there's a celery mascot that comes out. And I don't understand why it's a celery mascot. I don't get that. And they play the Blur song. It's song number 1 or 2 or whatever it's called, where it goes, woohoo! And so my kids have started calling the Blue Rock Stadium the Woohoo Stadium because of that song. And we go there every year.
That's as accurate as its actual name.
Yeah, the Frawley Stadium. And we go there every year for a certain event, and they're like, when are we going to see the celery guy? And we're like, every time that they score a home run, every time they get a point, we're going to see it. Did they score a point yet? No, you'll hear the song, and they don't even care what's happening. They just want to see the mascot. That's it.
You'll know. Now, celery as a mascot is a little bit odd, but we are very close to Philadelphia that has the 2 oddest mascots ever.
That's true.
The Philly Fanatic, and Gritty.
And Gritty.
Mm-hmm.
I love Gritty. Gritty's the best.
I did not realize that there's this fan base behind Gritty that kind of attributes personality factors to him.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild.
Oh, there are memes out there.
Oh, my
memes
gosh.
aplenty about Gritty.
Memes and whole backstories.
And he looks so weird. I'm sorry. Some of our audience is not going to know who Gritty is. Look him up.
Yeah.
Gritty. He is the Flyers mascot, the Philadelphia Flyers mascot. Gritty. Look him up. He has crazy looking, big googly eyes, bright red fur all over.
Goofy looking.
Goofy looking, crazy. Like he's nothing like the Flyers. You'd think maybe it's a bird mascot or something. No, Gritty is not any of that. Gritty is just Gritty's Gritty.
Yeah.
There's no other explanation.
There's no other category.
And he's amazing. He is absolutely amazing.
So I don't know what the mascot was for this team in Sanford, Maine.
Babe Ruth.
I mean,
I don't know.
I think it was called the Babe Ruth League, the league that these kids
That would
play.
make sense.
I actually believe it was. It was Little League.
it was 200 people total in the ballpark. So watching a game, it was being played like they were actually, in one of the innings. I forget which one. I think the artist said was that the
Bottom
fifth
of the
inning.
fifth, maybe.
Bottom of the fifth. Oh yeah, I did say bottom of the 5th inning, right? So the boredom was almost over, I guess. Well,
that's a little more than halfway. That's a little over halfway.
More than halfway.
I think.
Unless it goes into extra innings, extra boredom.
Oof. Adding some extra boredom onto the end there.
So people are probably thinking, man, this is going nowhere, but it got way more exciting.
Yeah.
So at about 7 p.m.
I got to say, it is a little bit more exciting when a red Honda Civic comes onto the field.
You have, Carol's driving a maroon 2003 Honda Civic, and she arrived at about 7 p.m. She actually been there earlier that day. She was talking to herself and revving the engine. People saw her.
The article mentions a couple of the groundskeepers were out like painting stuff, and the younger ones looked at the older ones and said, "Your girlfriend's here and she's pretty mad." like what? Because she's like screaming angrily.
Yeah,
A very stereotypical thing for guys to say.
Yeah, well, young kids or young guys especially tend to be dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean...
Not that we get much better as we age, but our dumb just comes in different directions.
It's fair. It's fair. We just had some commentary from
Did the producer say
behind the
something?
cameras. Maybe we should put a microphone over there.
Yeah. Our producer agrees with everything I just said. In triplicate.
Just happens to be a different gender than we are. Maybe that plays a factor.
If we only had a camera that pointed the other way. I was just talking about that. So she, we're to assume she was in a manic phase of bipolar disorder. I think it's reasonable to believe that, but something was going on either way. And she approaches, she goes in this alley. Now there's this, you can see it, on the maps, how the field is kind of laid out. It's pretty simple, pretty standard. She drove up along, I think it was third base.
Generally, I think baseball fields are diamonds in shape.
Yeah, they're diamond shaped, but in terms of like where the alleys are to get, there's like access on each side of the of the field, and she's coming along third base on a third base dugout. She takes her vehicle on this alley. I imagine this is for like vendors to drop off stuff or like if equipment. You're not supposed to, this is not where you park.
Lawn care equipment probably uses that pretty regularly.
Yeah. You could tell.
For loading and unloading things, you probably would have been better off with like a having installed like a hydraulic barrier system that could have keep things out, but it could be lowered so that it can drive a van or something onto the field if necessary. I learned a lot about those when I was trying to make my living pitching those kinds of safety ideas to municipal playgrounds and ballparks. But apparently they didn't have one of those here. From what I understand, they do now. There
metal
now
gate
are
there.
some safety procedures.
Yep.
In place.
Yeah, I imagine that they're pretty sensitive about people driving up on the field now. But she comes to him, there's a guy there, right? And she tells him to open the gate. She uses expletives, at least one.
And this guy, I think, was a sponsor of the team. It was sponsored by an insurance company, I believe. And this guy had the same last name as that insurance company. So I think he was a sponsor of one of the teams. So it was, I think he probably was very involved with this team, I would imagine. Very much there for many of the games, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, he didn't open the gate.
No, so, she still decided that it was worth going through.
Yeah. Yeah, Carol found another way. She drove through it with her car.
To be fair, even 2003 maroon Honda Civic is very likely to be able to go through a chain link fence gate.
They're not that tough.
With relative ease. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about Fort Knox level security here.
Right.
Yeah. So she she gets on the diamond, and she drove, as I understand it, drove third base. Doesn't make much sense. You go from home plate to first, right?
Yeah, you're supposed to go home first, second, third, and then back around to home.
Then she goes to second. Then she went to first, then home plate, and then over the pitcher's mound. Is that even a thing? Runners don't go over the pitcher's mound.
But cars do,
really.
apparently.
Cars do, apparently. I'm sorry. This always, like every time I read this part where she's on the field, even when I saw the actual film footage of it, I could not help but think of The Simpsons. There's an episode where Homer and his guys drunkenly drive around the baseball diamond of Bart's school. Mm-hmm. And they start at home plate, go to first, second, third, back around for the home run, and they're screaming the entire time. It's hilarious. But it just, why wouldn't you do it that way?
Well, why would you do it at all?
If
That's
you're going
the
to
biggest
commit,
question.
it doesn't matter. If you're going to commit to driving on the baseball diamond, you drive the home run.
Yeah.
Right? You don't start at third and go around to home. Like that's.
Yeah. So this is something I mentioned in a video I did about this case. So people at the park, they were running and screaming in terror, right? Because she was driving around the thing. She cleared the bases and the crowd went wild.
That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
That is
That's
what
true.
happened.
They did go wild.
Yeah. The announcer repeatedly said, "Get off the field." Good advice when there's a car.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
A car driving around there. But she did eventually. But the people were running to get off the field. Carol drove off the field eventually as well, and she went to the main gate as if she was done with her adventure. Right?
Yeah. Done now. Made my rounds. I'm out.
Yeah, she'd accomplished everything that she meant to, I guess. And she was getting ready to leave the ballpark. And this is where we go back to the first story.
I got my touchdown. I'm out of here.
That's a touchdown. She got a knockout.
Because that shows about as much knowledge of baseball or sports as any of us has actually demonstrated.
That's true.
Through
Very
this. True. And being in the state she was, very likely a thing that she could have said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is, I think, a time when most people, if you look at, there was video, actually, right? There was some video taken. And at one point, this guy takes a baseball bat.
throws it right at the car.
And he runs at the car, and he, like, wings the bat. I think it might have struck the car.
And bounced off
of it.
Did nothing to slow it down or stop it. Like, why would it? And why would you do that?
Was he expecting, like, stick in the engine block and, like, like coolant would be coming out.
But like, how cool of a superhero moment would have been if he ran up and threw it and just like spiked it right through the wheel and it hit, and the car flipped over.
Yeah.
Like, and he's just like walking away, and the car explodes in the background. He's just like cool walking away.
Right.
That's a movie, not real life.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think the great risk there would be the bat's going to come back and hit you.
That's true.
Yeah.
Much more likely.
And what a horrible way that would have been to die. Just a total like.
Right.
Like. So yeah, my dad was running this car and he threw the bat and the bat came back and hit him and he died.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the things would go wrong in that situation, rather than the right through the engine block like a sword or something, and everything just stops abruptly.
Yeah, no, he would have had to have jumped into the air and brought the baseball bat down in the middle of the hood for it to stop like that. But like,
yes,
he could have gone out as Batman.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's bat to the head, man.
Well, yeah. So the bat was ineffective, and
Definitely was ineffective.
so as this was happening, so I imagine that as Carol was driving on the on the baseball diamond, rounding the bases, this is when Doug jumped into action because he was way up there in the stands, and he came down.
Yeah. And what's interesting, before we get into that, the reason he was there at all, like, one was his grandson was playing. His grandson was 19, was playing in the game. But he actually had been deciding, because he's like, I'm dying of cancer. So I'm going to leave my car, my favorite car, my 500 horsepower Mustang GT is going to be left to my grandson. And then somebody said, don't you think it's a really fast car to give to a kid that age? He's like, right. You're right. It is. Now, this is where I think that it comes back, his connection comes back to Carly-Ann. That he's like, yeah, a really fast car for a 19-year-old kid is not a good idea. I know that from personal experience.
Right. Been there, done that.
So he went to a dealership. He drove his Mustang down to a dealership and bought a Nissan Altima for his grandson. Paid cash. Drove the Altima over and had the Altima in the parking lot. And that's why he was there, was to deliver the Altima to his grandson after the game. Mm-hmm. But he was up in the stands waiting, watching the game.
He was in his normal seat. He regularly went to the games, my understanding.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. Yeah, so he came down. I imagine as soon as she started driving around, he started going down to get to that gate. So he was trying to trap her in the ballpark from the beginning, which I think was a horrendously bad idea.
I mean, she had already demonstrated that the power of the maroon
baseball bats are completely ineffective.
The 2003 maroon Honda Civic was impervious to the gate, the first gate that she drove through.
To something blocking
absolutely impervious to baseball bats that are thrown at it.
Right.
He's going to try and close another chain link fence and keep her in.
Yeah, it looked like a pretty weak gate. You could see. I mean, I'm sure the one featured now is a new one, but yeah, it's not like some type of concrete barrier.
Not car proof.
Right. Yeah.
So he, so it's like just basically this parking lot that she was driving through that goes kind of toward where the gate is, and this goes out into a street, and he's like pulling it closed, or like I don't know if it swings closed. I don't know how it worked then, but probably swings closed, probably on a hinge. And people were screaming at him, like, "Hey, she's gonna kill you."
Yeah.
Probably best to move out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
But he continues trying to hold the gate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Carol hit him so hard she knocked him 40 feet into the air, and he landed on Robert Street, which is the street right out, adjacent to the stadium. Mm-hmm. So she knocked him out of the park, literally. And he did not survive.
No. He didn't go quite 133 feet, though.
No.
Right.
40 feet in the air is pretty impressive.
40 feet in the air is impressive.
So the Honda really had quite a bit of power.
Yeah. Don't underestimate the power of a 2003 maroon Honda Civic.
That's an impressive machine.
It's an impressive machine.
So Carol drove to her apartment. She just kept driving after she killed him. Mm-hmm. And they went, there's also video, body cam, of the police talking to her. They were very nice, considering she had just killed somebody. And she thought she was a Navy SEAL. and was friends with Tom Brady and had played baseball with Babe Ruth.
Pretty impressive life, doing all that. And yeah.
Yeah, so she was arrested. And
I mean, I guess Navy SEALs do get away with a home run starting at third and going around the other way.
And if you played with Babe Ruth.
And if you played with Babe Ruth, obviously,
Right.
every shot's a home run.
Yeah.
yeah, so before she was arrested, she was talking to her hand, like as if there was a phone in it, and an attorney was on the line, right? So I think the police kind of knew there was a mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some issues here.
If the cop didn't catch onto a mental health issue there, they really, really should not be responding to any incidents that involving people.
Yeah. So her attorney, the one she was talking to, the invisible phone one. I mean, the price was right, I guess, right?
It's true.
2019, a judge found that she could not be held criminally responsible for her actions because of the state of her mental health. And had two different mental health professionals, forensic mental health professionals, testify as to her state of mind at the time. And she was apparently so enraptured in a psychotic episode that she was not aware of what she was doing. And therefore the judge said she was not criminally liable.
Right.
For
she
her
was
actions.
charged. She was charged with manslaughter, but ultimately found not criminally responsible due to insanity. An unusual finding, but one that does seem pretty well supported by her behavior. I
By
mean,
the facts.
Yeah, she pled no contest to it as well. So she was to the stuff, but the sentencing was, the judge was like, well, I can't send her, but she is been remanded to the custody of a mental health facility for the remainder of her life. Like she'll probably be there forever.
yeah, she's well. I don't. I mean, it's probably indeterminate, but yeah, I guess she will be there for a long time. And they talked to her for the documentary. I think it was the documentary. Yeah. They spoke to her, and people have come up with this idea that she was an instrument of justice, right? Like the through the bipolar, or through whatever, she killed Doug, and he was a bad man, right? Because he killed a little girl, and she doesn't want any part of it.
Right.
No part of it. No part of this idea that it was destiny for her.
Yeah.
She's very sad about what happened.
Right. The kind of guilt that she experiences
Mhm.
doesn't want to be that poster child for, you avenged this little girl's death, right?
Yeah, did not want to be glorified for causing death.
Mm-hmm.
So the guy who murdered the little girl while driving drunk is killed by someone who escaped responsibility for probably a valid reason.
Yeah.
But killed in the same way.
Right.
Not exact.
Right.
I mean,
Killed by vehicle.
yeah, killed.
Yeah.
Killed by being run into with a sedan.
Mm-hmm.
What?
What are the odds?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just incredible.
I don't know if there are any other instances of someone being killed by a car on a baseball diamond.
That's true.
Like that, really low chance of that happening.
That might be the only time that's ever happened. Yeah, almost like so there's a fatalistic component, right? Like almost like that car was sent to get him. Like I get it. I don't think that happened, but I get the superstition that can surround a case like this.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about a car coming back to get somebody for revenge. You watch the movie The Wraith. It's a 1980s movie with Charlie Sheen in it. It's a really terrible movie, but it's one of my favorite, like, really terrible movies from the 80s. It's about a guy who gets murdered and then comes back as a wraith in a supercar, because the gang members who killed him are all like racing punks. So the supercar comes back and races them and kills them.
It does sound terrible.
It is a terrible, terrible movie, but it's wonderful to watch.
Whether they made it in the 80s, the 90s,
It was the 80s.
anywhere in the 2000s, I think that would have been a terrible movie at any of those
Oh
points.
yeah, if it was remade today, it'd be a terrible movie.
Yeah.
But I would still watch it. The hell of it. Right?
There's also a famous Stephen King, I think,
Yeah,
book
Christine.
and movie, right? Christine. Yeah, with a killer. I guess supposed to be a demonic car.
Yeah.
That for the movie, it was like, I guess supposed to be good special effects the way they had the car heal itself, whatever, like when it ran people over.
Yeah.
I didn't think the movie was that.
It wasn't. It wasn't that great. And the much better rendition was in Futurama. Yeah, also by Matt Groening.
Simpsons, right?
The murder car. It was made from the most evil parts of the most evil cars in history.
I'm glad Futurama came back. I've watched all of them so far. I think it's season 11, right? Because it really is as good as The Simpsons.
That's like the one show that like it was canceled and then came back for new seasons and then was canceled again and came back for new episodes and then was canceled again and came. It just keeps bouncing around to networks or providers.
Now it's on Hulu, right?
Now it's on Hulu and they're just making new episodes. But it's worth it because those characters and the writing is spot on.
It's great.
It's
a great
super
show.
smart too.
Yeah.
Like it's really dumb but super smart.
I like the robot that's always like stabbing people. Not Bender, but the character that comes in every so often.
I know you're talking about. I can't remember his
They
name.
described, I think, in one episode as Stabby.
Yeah.
He was in one of the new ones.
Oh yeah.
What is
it Enrique? Enrique, something like that. Like he was.
That's a soap opera. Was Enrique the soap opera robot, or was that?
I don't remember.
Was it Maurice was the killer?
I think it was Maurice.
Was
the stabby? He was the reason that Fry thought that he was a robot for a while in an episode because he was locked up in the robot sanitarium with the other robots.
That show is very clever.
That show is very, very smart.
Underrated. Yeah, even though a lot of people like it, I think it's still underrated. Very clever. All right, so the last part of this is, of course, what's the legacy of Doug? He's someone who killed a little girl. That's how I look at it.
Yep.
And I don't think he did anything at the end of his life that was that incredible. Maybe he wanted to die. Maybe he was a hero trying to save people, but trapping her in the stadium was the ballpark was a terrible idea.
Right.
So even if he had been successful and she didn't just drive through the gate, more people could have been hurt. So I think it was just an incredible coincidence, and he, maybe he kind of looked at it like he got away with something and he didn't want her to get away.
Right.
I don't know, like some type of his weird version of justice where
he saw an opportunity and wanted to take it. Yeah.
Like she should pay for this, whatever. Kind of ironic. Maybe he was trying to be a hero. Maybe he thought he was doing the right thing.
Right.
And he could redeem himself. But I don't think, honestly, I don't think he cared. I don't think he cared. Because when he was approached again in 2013, his first thing for a while was to deny it.
Right.
Even when he knew that there was no possible way to be prosecuted.
Even at that point, though, he'd spent 45 years denying it, even to himself. Like every once in a while, get drunk and confess to somebody, so people knew. But he kind of was going his entire life denying it to himself. Part of that PTSD thing, the changes in cognition. He's denying it to himself the entire time. So of course, when law enforcement comes back at him, he denies it. He denies and denies and denies, especially since he doesn't remember it. He was so intoxicated, he literally does not remember it.
Yeah. I think we've talked about this before with drunk driving. It's something that's just ridiculous and has to stop.
Yeah.
And I know this was 1968 before a lot of the initiatives were started, but there's no excuse for it. There really isn't.
No.
And it's unacceptable. And I don't really have much sympathy for him. I mean, it's sad that he died in the ballpark and got run over by a Honda Civic or knocked out of the ballpark, whatever. But he was a killer and he escaped justice. He didn't escape that Honda Civic.
No, he did not.
For whatever it's worth. I think prison would have been the better place. I think he needed to be in prison for what he did. Yeah. So he enjoyed a lot of years, whereas Carol Lee, her life was cut short.
Yeah.
As far as Carol Sharrow, I can understand her position. She doesn't want to be involved in this idea that it was destiny, and it wasn't.
Right.
She just happened to,
something that she's been experiencing for years, and it was a terrible situation. I can't blame her for not wanting to relive that and be seen as some kind of hero or something like that. And I'm sure that plagues her very much.
I mean,
since then.
She definitely has to live with the fact that she killed someone, and she, even though she wasn't in a state of mind to really remember or be cognizant of it either, she at least showed some remorse for it afterwards and said, I'm pleading no contest to this. I'm like, I know that I did this, and it, whatever the courts have for me, but she even now is remorseful of it and recognizes it. I think that ultimately Douglas did too. Like, he recognized it, but his way of dealing with it was with alcohol and probably alcohol and lies, and trying to deny and boost himself up in other ways. Ultimately, some of the witnesses said that he was pushing kids out of the way at the gateway, like before he was closing the gates, that he was pushing them out of the way so they would be in safe places. And then he got hit.
I'd be surprised.
But
yeah,
I think that he might have been pushing kids out of the way so he could try and close the gate, and that happened to put them out of harm's way. But I don't know. I'm not necessarily sure that he was trying specifically to save any one child. No. It wasn't like he saw a kid and went, "I have to save that child," and trucked across the field and did the dive and roll and got hit on the back and saved the dies with the child.
Took the bullet.
Yeah, he takes the bullet, dies, but the child's okay in his arms. Like that's not what happened. Mm-mm. Like, not at all.
No, I think too, maybe witnesses remember him as heroic until they found out. Yeah. I mean, that could have been it. Like, oh yeah, he had kids on his arms and he was carrying them out, and sure. I mean, maybe he did. I don't know, but it's just, I don't know if there are any kids to be moved out of the way, because I would think other parents would kind of realize that the car has to stay on the ground, most of the time. So you're safer not being in front of it.
Right.
Like were the parents like, oh yeah, where's little Johnny? Oh no, no, they knew. Yeah. They saw this woman driving around. I don't think that Doug saved anybody. So, final thoughts about this case?
I don't really have any. Well, you know what? I guess the only other thing that we didn't talk about was Carol Lee Ashby's family and kind of their reaction to all of this. They heard about this and heard about Doug being killed, specifically by a car hitting him. And I believe it was Carol Lee's sister was like, honestly, I sighed a sigh of relief. And she said something like, I hate that I did, and it doesn't feel right to sigh a sigh of relief when somebody gets killed, when somebody dies, but I did. This felt, to her, it felt, I don't know about felt good necessarily, but there was a part of her that was like, this felt good for just a second. And she felt bad about that, to my understanding. But nonetheless, the kind of feeling that one feels when something bad happens to somebody who did something bad to someone you loved is a difficult feeling to feel.
Well, the justice system,
there's no right or wrong way to feel that.
The justice system denied her sister justice, and here, this woman with bipolar disorder granted it. Yeah,
right. So, no right or wrong way to feel after something like that, but you can't mistake. You have to be understanding that she's had that her whole life of not really having an. She knew the answer, but not really having an answer for what happened and justice and everything. So, yeah, that had to be a very difficult thing for her as well, to just kind of have that whole situation in 1968 kind of be brought up again all those years later because of this weird event.
Yeah. Right.
I think it always becomes, people want to believe in karmic justice, that people get their just desserts, but this is really, it's coincidence, honestly. And a lot of people are going to be, well, there's no such thing as coincidence. You can't just be coincidence when it's something like this. But to be honest, like he put himself in that particular place. If he really did have cancer, then he was doing it to take himself out. It was kind of a self-directed thing where he wanted it. Mm-hmm. There was some indication that was kind of his state of mind, but it wasn't justice. The justice, as I said, the old saying, justice delayed is justice denied. In this case, justice was delayed until it was eked out by coincidence. I always think that I do kind of argue sometimes with the justice delayed is justice denied. If it's delayed to make sure you get the right person, it's not delayed, for a bad reason. But this was delayed because the police didn't do their job. They chose not to act, not to do something. And I think that is the biggest failure of this story is the police in 1968 and then again in 75 chose not to do anything. And then Doug got away with killing a little girl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the police here, I mean, I think they get a pass in the story because the focus is so much on Doug. But you're right. I mean, they're guilty too. Not of the manslaughter, but they're guilty of not pursuing justice, and it's unforgivable just about what they did. Yeah. It makes no sense, and I can't see it happen these days. And I don't even think it was necessarily the overarching mentality of 1968 to say, oh, let's let kids get run over and not worry about it. I think that was atypical.
I think some other places might have gone a little bit further, but small town, Fulton, New York, they made that decision.
Yeah, it was a very poor decision.
Yeah. But I'm thinking about either a baseball bat or a 2003 maroon Honda Civic for our
death car.
The death car, yeah, for that one.
Makes sense.
So put your votes in the comment section for either baseball bat or Honda Civic for next time, and or for whenever you can.
Yeah, whenever I get a chance to get them on the table. I've got Cocaine Bear in the works. He's still got to be painted.
Cocaine Bear is on the way.
Yeah.
All right. So that's our episode for tonight, episode of The Murder Part. Very peculiar case. Yeah. Really just one that stood out so much to me. Yeah. Please put any thoughts in the comment section. We'll read them and we'll try to respond to as many as possible with shorts or some other mechanism. And we'll be back soon. Thank you so much for watching.